Men I Might Have Married by Jessie Pope. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Ruth Golding. 1. The pauseless cawing of the rooks fills me with secret agitation. The murmuring of mountain brooks renews in full an old sensation. And when in woodlands moist and thin, where yesterday the mavis carolled, I hear the cricket's ceaseless din, instinctively I think of Harold. He was a man of ample views, of lofty brain and noble presence. Incited by the daily news, he sifted tariffs to their essence. Or in a voice of rolling sound he thundered out titbits of Browning. On primal law he would expound, or how to save the nearly drowning. The punster's wit he did abhor, he loathed an atmosphere of laughter. A waiting hush must fall before he spoke, and silence follow after. And so he walked with me apart, with facts and figures plied and proved me. Mine was till then a simple heart, nor had I nerves till Harold loved me. I was his choice, when all was said, and if I ventured to dispute it, he proved by logic we must wed, and I was powerless to refute it. But ere the wedding day drew near, my hand in sad farewell extending, I told him I could hardly hear, and total deafness was impending. For once he answered not a word. Beneath the blow he fairly staggered. That he should speak and not be heard, it was enough to make him haggard. He conjured up our married days. The vision made his bosom harden, when "What? Can't hear you. What do you say?" would alternate with "Beg your pardon." So Harold left me with a kiss. His heart was firm, he did not falter, and very shortly after this he led another to the altar. And though with ill-befitting haste I cast aside that threatened illness, it left behind a settled taste for absolute, unbroken stillness. 2. To Geoffrey I was much attached, his ardour was unshaken. Our friends declared us nicely matched, nor were our friends mistaken. Indeed, we never had a spar until he bought a motor car. At first my joy was unconfined, the prospect was unclouded. I wore a coat chinchilla lined, a cap with chiffon shrouded. Diurnal spins with lunch for two I planned. Alas, I little knew. The carburettor spoilt our fun. Then something started squeaking, or else exploded like a gun. The tyres were always leaking. We had a puncture, then a burst, but Geoffrey's temper was the worst. He stifled with a muttered growl attempts at conversation, and hurtled over flesh and fowl to reach his destination. A look of crime was on his face. His fingernails were a disgrace. That car despoiled him of his youth. He'd brood on her for hours, and yet he seldom spoke the truth when bragging of her powers. And if the traffic wouldn't clear, his language wasn't fit to hear. He bought her such expensive things, and lavished every penny on hoods and bonnets, belts and rings. He never bought me any. His manner grew absorbed or rough, until I said I'd had enough. I told him frankly to decide, I spoke without emotion, between a motor and a bride. I'd share no man's devotion. The lack of me his life would mar, he said, but thought he'd choose the car. 3. Bob was a sympathetic soul. His generosity was noted. I can't sufficiently extol his courtesy, so often quoted. His work achieved a marked success. his brain was keen, his nerve perfection, and yet at games I must confess his clumsiness was past correction. At golf he'd mutilate the ground. His strength was huge, but unadjusted. He'd swing himself completely round and sit upon the tee disgusted. He'd hack the bunkers right away while clubheads through the air went hissing. And after Bob had had a day, the links themselves were mostly missing. Though Bob was loved by not a few, yet billiards won him savage strictures. He'd burst the pockets with his cue, or make his ball bombard the pictures. Or when with oscillating gun he aimed at partridges or plover, he'd make the other sportsmen run like rabbits for the nearest cover. Nor was he different at a dance, for like a hulk that rolls and pitches, he cleft a cumbersome advance amid the sound of rending stitches. And when, with innocent intent, he frolicked as the tune went faster, and fell, as fall he must, he sent a baker's dozen to disaster. So when he vowed with tragic voice, his heel upon my flounces setting, I was his one and only choice, all former love affairs forgetting, and on the tray unwisely sat where claret cup and ices mingle, I gently intimated that I thought it safer to be single. 4. A sense of humour is my shield, my jokes are glib, if humble, and yet to no man will I yield my liberty to grumble. And Montague my temper sorely tried by always looking on the sunny side. If I anathematized the rain, my grief he never heeded, remarking that to swell the grain another inch was needed. Of picnics, he'd observe, we'd had our share, and disappointments we must grin and bear. Or when at golf I met defeat, his fortitude was fearful. He made my misery complete. No wonder I was tearful. The best must always win in every strife, he said, and patience is the salt of life. When I was grossly overcharged for frocks that never fitted, and on my grievances enlarged, he neither helped nor pitied. Annoyances like that, he said, were small. Some human beings had no clothes at all. Or if, when toothache racked me through, my cheek became inflated, he always took a Spartan view of ills so overrated. What was my pain, he'd answer with aplomb, to that of people shattered by a bomb? I broke my vows when all was done from sheer exasperation. I really failed to see the fun of lifelong resignation. And when he argued, angry and distressed, I merely said, "Whatever is best." 5. Macneill was a man I admired. He'd won international laurels, but his bosom was easily fired with a passionate craving for quarrels. From morning till night he spoiled for a fight. His hair was aggressively red. He sneered at a life lacking bloodshed and strife, or a peaceable death in his bed. If I went a short journey by train, with Mac as my stalwart protector, with the guard he would wage a campaign, or fall foul of the ticket collector. If the cabby should dare to ask more than his fare, very soon he perceived his mistake. And wherever we went, upon pleasure intent, I was most of the time on the shake. I quarrelled with numerous friends, or Mac did the quarrelling for me, and rather than offer amends, to cut every one he'd implore me. Though a challenge he hurled at the rest of the world, dissension with me he would shun, till it grew rather tame to be out of the game, so I entered the lists just for fun. I forget how the quarrel began. I remember quite well how it finished. How high personalities ran, while our tender affection diminished. With visages flushed to the combat we rushed. Of course we said more than we meant. Then I told him to go, all was over, and so, to my utter amazement, he went. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.